The godfather of annual college football preview magazines, Phil Steele, has put out his annual preview. How do things look for the BYU football program in his eyes? Really, there's only one way to go for BYU football, and it's up.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first to listen to the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and we are brought to you today by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has found the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's dive right in and dive into the Phil Steele annual college football preview. Now, if you're wondering where your magazine is at, it's not out yet. Let's be very clear about that. I was one of those people who paid for instant access to the online or the digital version of it the second it came available, and I have been devouring it for most of the last day since it became available. And the bigger thing for me is I love reading what Phil Steele has to say just because he has been doing this for so long, and he's fairly accurate in his assessment, honestly. Now, the concern I have, if he is accurate, is that the BYU football program is in for another rough year. That's the only concern I have looking at this. Now, the biggest thing with Phil Steele is it is a preview. He is prognosticating based off last year and the years previous to that, the successes and the failures, trying to predict the future for BYU and the other 134 college football FBS programs out there, whether at the Power 4 or the G5 level. And the bigger concern to me reading about BYU from Phil Steele is that he, like many others in terms of the preview space for BYU this season, are very down on the Cougars' overall talent base. Now, I think it's very easy to be that way because the concern is that BYU last year did not have the horses to replace guys when they went down due to injury. Most notably, think about what happened when Ben Bywater went down for BYU's defense. It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. BYU's defense never really recovered the rest of the year. The other concern is this: do the Cougars have a quarterback that can elevate the players around them? That is a massive concern. We've had that very concern on this podcast from yours truly, and many of you, our listeners out there, saying that if BYU doesn't have a quarterback, what do they really have? Well, that's a great question in and of itself. The concern I have reading up on this from Phil Steele is that, as he mentions in his predictions for BYU, he says this: despite just missing on a bowl last year, only one of my 9 sets of power ratings calls for a bowl this season, and it may be a second year of adding talent and depth to compete in a Power 4 conference. Okay. He thinks the BYU is in for another rebuilding year and kind of gearing themselves up to eventually, hopefully, become a player in the Big 12 conference. My concern is that I don't think any of you out there, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think many of you out there are content to watch BYU go through another quote unquote rebuilding year. That is the concern. If BYU were to go 4-8 or sink to a 3-9 and finish 14th in the 16-team Big 12, as Phil Steele is indicating here for the Cougars, what are the reactions of Cougar Nation going to be? Because they're already at a fever pitch in terms of fairly negative, honestly, across the board. Cougar fans are really out on this BYU football program, and I can understand exactly why. This is a program that got to 5-2 last year and then suffered a 5-game losing streak, really only putting themselves out there in terms of playing 110% of what you felt like they could have played when the season was on the line against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Where was that hunger? Where was that desire against the likes of West Virginia and some of these other games where BYU got absolutely obliterated on the field? That is the concern I think Cougar Nation has, and I think Phil Steele shares that concern as you look at this. He only has BYU in terms of the unit rankings in the Big 12. So he rated each unit, quarterbacks, defensive line, offensive line, you know what I'm talking about, 1 through 16. The only unit that is not in the double digits here for BYU is BYU special teams. That is the concern. The highest rated unit for in Phil Steele's eyes for BYU is the defensive backs at 11th. He's got linebackers 15th, defensive line 15th, offensive line 14th, wide receivers and tight ends 13th, running backs 15th, and quarterbacks 13th. That is a dearth in his eyes of talent around the BYU football program, and it's going to take some time for them to build this up. He does indicate that BYU has the 31st best program in terms of it's the 31st most returning experience for the Cougars. And that I can tell you that is one thing BYU is banking on for an improved product this year is the fact that they have a mass panic, hit the transfer portal a gazillion times all over again, and try and turn over that roster once more. They are banking on continuity and skill development and working with the guys already in the program as being maybe their chief catalyst to help them get back to being a winning football program. I have angered some of you out there by saying that my goal for BYU is go 6-6. And some of you were like, well, that means they're going to win 3 non-conference games. They're going to only win 3 games in the conference. That doesn't show any improvement, Jake. Here's the fact of the matter. BYU's non-conference slate outside of Southern Illinois, I'm not picking BYU to go to SMU or go to Wyoming and win those games handily. Those are both very, very quietly solid programs out there, more particularly Wyoming. I think people are sleeping on the Cowboys. And if you're planning on making the trip to Laramie, get ready because that could be a very, very sneaky, tough matchup for the BYU football program. So, well, Jake, where are the 5 wins going to come from? It's anybody's guess outside of the Southern Illinois game for me. I think that Arizona State and Houston, who BYU both have both at the end of the season, they go to ASU the week before Thanksgiving, and then they finish up on Thanksgiving weekend with Houston. Well, those are the 2 programs picked in and around BYU in most of these prognostications, and those are probably 2 of the games you're going to be counting on to win. So that's 3 wins. Where do you get 3 more? Can you go out and stun the likes of a Kansas State as you open Big 12 play? Can you win one of the SMU or Wyoming games? It's going to be a very, very tough season for BYU because, as Phil Steele says, you have the 31st best in terms of overall returning experience, but as Phil Steele ranks it, the 23rd toughest schedule in the entire country. It's actually a break from last year because he actually ranked BYU as having the 13th toughest schedule in 2023, and we saw what BYU accomplished against that slate. I look at this and I say that Phil Steele, I don't think he's necessarily wrong. But I want to say that I think BYU, the football program itself, I'm talking about Kalani Sitake, all of his assistants, his coordinators, the administrators around the program, the players themselves, they love this, I think. I think they're looking at this as an opportunity to go out and strike from essentially having very, very few expectations heaped upon them, especially when it comes to the national media. That is an advantageous part to be if you're BYU, is you don't have people saying that you're supposed to go out and win the Big 12. Frankly, I'll just spoil this right now. Phil Steele has Utah as his number 1 surprise team and expects them to be in the college football playoff. He expects them to win the Big 12 conference. BYU's arch rival is supposed to come in year 1 in the conference and run away with it, according to Phil Steele. Wouldn't you love if you're BYU to go out and spoil that on November 9th? Sure you would, but you have to be able to go out there and prove yourself every game. The bigger concern I have for the BYU football program is not to take this season as a whole in terms of taking it 2 or 3 or 4 games at a time. You got to take it 1 game at a time. Focus on Southern Illinois, then focus on SMU, then Wyoming, and then get into Big 12 play and focus on Kansas State and on down the list until you finish up with Houston. You've got to go week by week. You've got to put in the time, the effort, the study, everything that it requires of you to be a better football program. That comes down to literally every single person inside the BYU football program. The hope is that they are all putting in the time requisite and needed to have an improved product on the field. And everything I've heard from people that are in the program, Connor Pay has said it on this podcast on the record, they are working double time to get things right. They don't want a repeat of last year. Will that ultimately come to fruition? That is a possibility. But the bigger concern is that the Cougars cannot allow in their minds to be defeated from the get-go. They've got to go out there and say, okay, yeah, you picked us 14th out of 16 teams. Where was the BYU basketball program picked in the preseason poll last year? Oh, 13th out of 14 teams? Let's take some inspiration. Let's go shock the world and do what the basketball team did when they finished 5th in the conference after being picked 2nd to last. BYU's picked 3rd to last right now. The football program should look at the basketball program for some inspiration, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that will give them enough to get over the hump, but only time will tell to see ultimately what comes to fruition for BYU football. And I'm hoping, I would love nothing more than to see BYU surpass my 6-6 mark. But according to Phil Steele, he's looking at a 3-4 win team, a 5-win team maybe at the very most. He doesn't see a bowl in BYU's immediate future, and that's a concern. if you're a Cougar fan, because I'm concerned what Cougar Nation might do if BYU misses out for a second straight year when it comes to the bowl situation and the postseason. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk about one of the position groups in that defensive back unit that I think has some talent in it, but might need a body or two added to it still via the transfer portal. That is BYU's cornerbacks, obviously headlined by Jakob Robinson. What else do they have in reserve there? Jernaro Gilford leads one of the more underrated units into the 2024 season. We'll talk about that next as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn is here for you guys, helping you out when you're hiring for your small business. You want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you guys need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and, more importantly, for free. Think about that. It's not just a job board. Speaking of LinkedIn, is helping you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively looking for a new job might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70%, you heard that, 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. If you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing many hats and might not have the adequate time or resources to hire. The best part is on LinkedIn, 86% of the small businesses are getting a qualified candidate within 24 hours of their job posting. So hire professionals like a professional and do it on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn Jobs to hire for their staff. So why aren't you doing that yourself? So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post that job for free. Of course, some terms and conditions apply. Thank you once again for being Locked On Cougars, your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys, if you're sick of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and haven't turned on the volume with all the shouting going on as they quote-unquote embrace debate, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, my friends. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories of all the screaming going on the other networks. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the motto is your team every day. All right. Let's talk about BYU's cornerback unit for a little bit here. Now, Jernaro Gilford, I think, remains one of BYU's most effective coaches. And I mean that by the fact that he is an incredible recruiter, A. He brings in talent that just continues to surpass all expectations. And B, he brings in that talent and he makes it as good as he possibly can make it. He is an incredibly detail-oriented coach. He makes sure the guys understand exactly what is expected of them as a position coach, but more importantly, he builds his guys up. He makes them believe they can do anything. And you can see, if you watch BYU's cornerbacks over the past few years, yeah, they've had their concerns at times, but more importantly, I think than anything else, is they have a self-belief, and that comes from their position coach. The best part about Jernaro Gilford is he has been everywhere that any of the young men who come to play for him at BYU have been. He was a student athlete at BYU. He was actually forced to leave school due to the honor code, came back to finish his career and finished it off with an absolute flourish. Who of you that is old enough to remember it will ever forget that interception he had to seal that win against Utah? Just an incredible singular play in a very, very good career for Jernaro Gilford. And he carries that forward now as a position coach leading BYU's cornerbacks. This is a cornerback unit that I believe has a lot of talent on it, but a lot of it's unproven, and there are injury concerns, more importantly, on top of this group. The leader is Jakob Robinson. Jakob Robinson is poised. If he goes out there and does what he's capable of doing, he could be an all Big 12 honoree at the end of the season. He has got that type of potential in him. He is not a big player by any means. He plays bigger than his listed size, 5'11", 170 pounds, but he is a big play waiting to happen. This is a young man that is opportunistic. He finds ways to make an impact in different ways, shapes, and forms. He's kind of more in the mold of, remember, like a Diane Lake or a Kai Nakua. By the way, Kai Nakua, I say congratulations to him, a former BYU standout. I was just named all UFL safety, a very solid season for him, playing for the Michigan Panthers in the UFL. So congratulations to him. But Jakob Robinson's kind of in that mold where his stats may not wow you, but his impact, with his ability to make game-changing plays, it's unmatched in many respects. And I think that he is going to go into this season looking to make it his absolute best because it's his final season as a Cougar. He's a senior this year. Opposite him, I am expecting Marque Collins to start for BYU. We had Jeff Hansen on the podcast just over a week ago, and he mentioned this, but I will reiterate it, that Marque Collins was actually listed to start in front of both Camden Garrett and Eddie Heckard during their time together at Weber State. The reason why those two players ultimately got more of the headlines and then ultimately landed at BYU was because Marque Collins has dealt with injuries during most of his career. He did not participate in spring ball. 5'11", 175-pound redshirt senior. He's got one season to get it right with BYU as a transfer in from Weber State. But J-Ho believes in what Marque Collins is capable of doing. If he is healthy, he is as good as they come, and he could be the third straight guy from Weber State to have an impact for BYU. Speaking of both Cam Garrett as well as Eddie Heckard last year, it'd be incredible to think that all three of those guys could have seasons like they did, but the potential is there for Marque Collins. Beyond that, if you have Marque Collins falter or if you have an injury or the like, the question is, who steps up in that circumstance? Well, I think the first person to look at is Mory Bamba, 6'3", 190 pounds. He looks like the prototypical cornerback you want at the Division I / FBS / Power 4 level. The biggest concern for Mory Bamba is being able to get out on the field and prove himself. He has not done that to this point. He's a redshirt junior. Remember, he was a transfer in from Tyler Junior College after just 1 year at the junior college level. And the hope is that maybe this year will be the year he finally comes into his own and starts to prove himself out there on the field. Like I said, at 6'3", 190 pounds, you can't teach what he's got in terms of physical tools. The concern is, can he put it all together and prove it on the football field? The other guy that I'm looking forward to, because he was a breakout last year, particularly on special teams, is Marcus McKenzie. Now, McKenzie dealt with an injury during spring camp that kept him out all of spring camp as well. It was a foot injury, but when he was healthy, remember how dynamic he was. His speed was on full display as a gunner for BYU on their punt team. But McKenzie has got the capability this year. If a guy like Mory Bamba isn't able to prove himself to be capable out there, or if you have a concern with Marque Collins' health, well, guess what? I would say Marcus McKenzie is the most likely guy to step up as the next guy in this rotation. The concern is that all three of the guys I've listed since I talked about Jakob Robinson all have had injury concerns or have just not been able to prove it on the field for any significant period of time to make you think, okay, they're set there. That is where I think BYU needs to hit the transfer portal, if at all possible, or maybe the junior college ranks, and find somebody to add to this roster late that can come in and at least compete for playing time and push the guys to be a little bit better. There are other guys on the roster that have capability. I think Jaden Dunlap, they didn't bring him in from Cerritos College to sit the bench like he has so far. The hope is that maybe he will be able to overcome some of his injury concerns and become a better player. You also look at a guy like an Evan Johnson, who's been in the program for quite some time now. He's just a redshirt sophomore. I think he's been around the program for 4 years now, if I recall correctly. And the hope is that he can go out and show what he's capable of. But then you come to the young buck, Therian Alexander. Trey Alexander, freshman from Ellenwood, Georgia, Southwest DeKalb High School. He has got every physical tool you want. Trey is listed at 6'2", 165 pounds. So he's a little bit skinny for what he is capable of. But this is an opportunity for Trey as a true freshman. He's got to be looking at every other guy on that roster outside of Jakob Robinson saying, hey, I can pass all these guys up. And if Trey Alexander proves to be the best player out there and he's capable of being a contributor, if I'm Jernaro Gilford, I'd throw him out there and let him learn by the trials that will come. It's a baptism by fire when you're playing as early as he possibly could play, speaking of Trey Alexander this season. But I think his experience going through that as a true freshman against Big 12 competition will only make him better. He showed flashes during spring ball of being a very, very good player. The bigger issue is his body capable of holding up at this level right now? Like I said, 6'2", 165 pounds. He's got the length. Does he have the overall size to go out there and compete? And the hope is if he does, why not give him a shot? I would, if everything else is even amongst some of these other guys on the roster in Jernaro Gilford's eyes, I would just go out there and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to give Trey a shot and see what he's capable of. Throw him out there. Let him get an opportunity to prove himself. And if he does, great. It's a sink or swim mentality. He's got to be able to prove himself. And he did not come to BYU to sit the bench. I can tell you, having had conversations with people connected with Trey, he is intent on playing this year for BYU. Will that ultimately play out? I hope it does, because he has got every skill you want in a cornerback. And the nice part is if he goes out there and proves he can play, that is only going to help BYU's recruiting pitch going to places like Georgia they have not traditionally recruited, because a guy like Trey took a chance on coming to BYU, did not really have many connections to the university itself, is coming clear across the country. He's ingratiated himself. He's doing a great job with Coug Connect and the different things he's doing on the NIL front. But if he can prove himself on the football field, that only strengthens BYU's recruiting pitch and only helps a guy like Jernaro Gilford go out and find the next crop of talent that he's trying to bring into this program. So if you were to ask me how I would stack up BYU's cornerback rotation, it starts with Jakob Robinson and Marque Collins. I think they're the 1-2 tandem to start for BYU at least game one, barring something unforeseen. My number twos, in my mind, end up being Mory, Bamba, and Marcus McKenzie, but I would have an or there along with Trey Alexander. That is the 5 men are on right now that I would look at as being your rotation for BYU at cornerback. Could Jaden Dunlap, Evan Johnson, Kevin Doe, Dylan Flowers, can any of those guys come out and impress in fall camp that we've not mentioned yet? Yes, they could, but I think they are further back in the race, and they have a lot of ground to make up if they want to be on the field for BYU this fall. But once again, I think they are still a man light at cornerback. So hit the transfer portal, hit the junior college ranks, and try and find somebody that can come in. I'm not saying they need to come in and be a day one starter, but you want them to be a part of the rotation and push the rest of the guys on this roster, because the injury concerns alone with most of those guys on that roster, that is the concern I have. But once again, if you're Trey Alexander, it's a major potential opportunity waiting for you, because if anybody falters, that is your time to go out there and prove yourself. And I've got a belief that Jernaro Gilford will give Trey every opportunity to earn playing time this season if he proves capable of that. So there you go. That's what I think of BYU's cornerbacks. I think they're a man light in terms of the overall rotation, but I do think the potential is there, and they do have one headlining star in Jakob Robinson that I think is going to elevate this crew a little bit more than otherwise might be expected from BYU's cornerbacks this season. All right, there you go. That's what I got for you guys. We'll wrap up today's show with an interesting assessment. Brock Harris, 2026 recruit, the top-rated tight end in his recruiting class. Well, let's just put it this way. Talking with some people at BYU, the hype is real, and I'll explain more as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to have some fun. Sometimes in baseball, the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals, and much more. Obviously, football is on its way as well, and you can bet on all of it with our friends at FanDuel. We talked a little bit earlier on about Phil Steele's non-belief in BYU football. He's got our friends at FanDuel have BYU at 4.5 wins. That's the over-under mark for BYU football this season. If you think like me that they can surpass that, go and pay some money on it. And the best part is right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet with our friends at FanDuel. It's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park, which for whatever MLB game you're watching, or literally anything else that FanDuel has odds on. The best part is FanDuel has it for you guys in a really easy to use app. So take advantage today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon, and it's all courtesy of FanDuel. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please consider signing up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a really, really fun way to interact with the show, support the show at the same time. You get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you, and then it's $4.99 a month afterwards to see if it's the right option for you as a Cougar fan. Click the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this, and join us today. It's a really, really fun thing. I dropped yesterday a list of who BYU's captains for the summer months are going to be. Obviously, those will not be the team captains for the upcoming season. They'll make that vote once again coming up in August, but the players leading BYU throughout the summer, I gave the list to our Locked On Cougars Insider Group just yesterday. So if you want that inside intel, please join us at our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, before we go on today's show, there's a lot going on with BYU camps this week. Obviously, there's a lot of high-level prospects out there. I'm going to pull up a text here I got from one of our, I'll call him a Locked On Cougars Insider, practice insider, and they said this: I had a chance to watch Brock Harris up close today at BYU football camp. It says that kid is a physical freak, probably the best looking tight end I've seen at the college level. Moves like a wide receiver, but has unreal size, so fluid his movements. Speaking of BYU, we've got to find a way to land him. Well, here's the thing, folks. Brock Harris, if you've not been paying attention, is the top-rated tight end in the 2026 recruiting cycle. So he's only going to be a junior this year. He plays at Desert Hills High School down there in southern Utah. His dad is a former BYU football player. And the crazy thing is Brock Harris is everything he's cracked up to be. Hearing that from that person, like I said, that text I just read to you, that person knows ball about as well as anybody that I can trust. And they are saying that about a kid who's only going to be a high school junior this year. The hype is real, everybody, and I hope that BYU can land Brock Harris. I think they have a little bit of an ace up their sleeve because Nolan Keeney, who committed last week to the BYU football program, I didn't know this until it was put out there on social media. He and Brock Harris are actually playing youth football together in their early years. I think they said in second grade or something like that they were playing together. So maybe Nolan Keeney can be a big part of BYU landing maybe the top-rated tight end recruit in program history, and more importantly, will be one of the top-rated recruits, period, the BYU's ever landed on the football side of things. It's crazy to hear this about a guy like Brock Harris, but don't be surprised as you continue to hear more about his name as it continues to blow up. He has got the absolute game-breaking ability that tight ends in this day and age in college football, and more importantly, the NFL need to have. He's got the size. I think he's listed at 6'6", 220 pounds, and he's an incredibly gifted athlete. It's a marvel of the size to speed to weight ratio and the athleticism that comes with that. But that was an encouraging thing to hear. And like they mentioned, they got to find a way, speaking of BYU, to land him. I think his connections to BYU give the Cougars a better than average chance of a recruit of his caliber, but don't expect it to be essentially a home run for BYU to land him, because he has got options literally coast to coast. Everybody, and I mean everybody out there, wants Brock Harris to play for them. BYU is lucky that he has family connections to the program. He's got a former youth teammate of his who is committed to play for BYU already. And the hope is that Kevin Gilbride and the rest of the BYU's offensive coaching staff can prove that the tight end position will remain a staple of the BYU offense, and that Brock Harris might be the next great star tight end in that very system. And we'll see how it all shakes out. But I wanted to pass that text along to you guys because that got me excited thinking about a young man of that caliber potentially picking BYU, because that'd be a really solid pickup for Kalani Sitake and his football program. All right, there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Tuesday edition of the show. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast, as always. The funny thing about this is I probably should pull back the curtain a little bit. This time of year, we call it the off season on the Locked On Network. We are only required to do 3 times a week on the network, but I've told you guys last year, I plan on doing a show every single day. So bear with me if I miss a day or two here and there, but honestly, it is my goal to just roll through the summer. We will come up with topics, may have to lean on our Locked On Cougars Insider group for some extra mailbags and the like, but if you guys have got topics you guys would like me to broach or talk about, feel free to reach out via social media or email, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. That is the email address to reach out and let us know what you guys would like to hear about. If you guys have thoughts, let me know, and we'll be sure to utilize them, because it gets a little bit lean this time of year. There are sometimes we're having to quote unquote manufacture topics, but if you've got one you'd like me to address, I'd love to hear it. So reach out and let us know. But a big thank you as always for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who once again are everydayers as well. And until tomorrow, my friends, have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back with you guys again tomorrow talking all things BYU right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.